Hello, welcome to part one of episode two of the Rejects of Capitalism podcast. My name is James Rooney,
And I'm Shane Turner.
and we are going to be talking about, well, first, we are going to talk about a big subject when it comes to our political discussions as leftists, and it is our relationship with uh with with what contemporary politicians and political experts would call liberals. So, Shane, can you get us started?
Yeah, sure. Basically, most people have this idea about what a liberal is, and they have an idea what a leftist is, but oftentimes it gets confusing.
Very confusing.
Many people who are Republican think that all Democrats are the same, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that Democrats are leftist, liberal, progressive, communist, and basically all the terms like leftist, liberal, progressive, communist, socialist, Marxist all apply to Democrats universally, basically. And that's
Basically
just
everything you
simply
see, basically everything you see in a Republican attack ad.
pretty much, yeah. Now, believe it or not, there is a difference between different kinds of Democrats and leftists. What we consider Democrats, like basically, and I had to like argue with like James on this before the show because he wanted to say that leftists hate Democrats, and I'm like, no, because
And
I'm a
yes,
leftist and I
he
consider myself a Democrat.
yeah, he did have to correct me. Like when I said the word Democrats, I I do mean Democratic officials. So going forward, when I say the term Democrats, I
You
mean
mean liberal?
I do mean Democratic politicians specifically, not as a universal rule, but as a
You're
general rule.
talking about the Democratic establishment, basically,
Yes,
and
like
that's liberals.
the Joe Bidens, the Barack Obamas of the political
Nancy
world.
Pelosi.
Nancy
Look,
Pelosi.
the leaders of the Democratic establishment are liberals, and there is
Yes.
a difference between a liberal and a progressive, a liberal and a leftist.
A progressive and a leftist.
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah.
Basically, a liberal in the 60s, a lot of people said things about liberals, basically that they were on the face, they were uh, tolerant and wanting to change things for the better. But when push came to shove, they really didn't. Like Phil Oakes did a song called "Love Me, I'm a Liberal," where he said that a liberal is someone who is left of center in good of times and 10 degrees right of center when it affects them personally.
Yeah.
So liberals are kind of like people who like the status quo but still think that the status quo can be changed.
Yeah, they want like an alteration of what the status quo is, but the vast majority of how society works should be unchanged.
Basically, here's a way to explain it. People like to point to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Nancy Pelosi and Hillary and talk about like glass ceiling feminism.
Right.
And they think that, oh, if only a woman were in charge, or a gay man were in charge, or a black man were in charge, then that would make things just. But
Yeah.
this line of thinking ignores the fact that in order for someone to be in charge, there has to be a hierarchy of power.
And inadvertently, like this is
Was,
when oh, go ahead.
yeah, basically the liberals, they want a marginalized person to be in control, but that relies on an existing hierarchy. And that right there is, I think, the key difference between leftists and liberals. Liberals don't want to get rid of hierarchy. Leftists want to eliminate hierarchy, or
Yes.
or at the very least unjust hierarchies.
And
Like,
go ahead.
no, I was gonna say like liberals will basically have no practical problem with the remnants of white supremacy, patriarchy, etc.
They just
So
want the
long
labels
as,
taken off.
yeah, basically, it doesn't matter. This is what leftists believe. It doesn't matter who's in control. The person in control could be a black person, they could be gay, they could be a woman. But if that person abuses people below them, then nothing really has changed. And by the way, libertarians, like I remember when Hillary got the nomination, like I remember like Reason, the
Simpler
libertarian,
times.
yeah. I
Simpler
remember then,
times.
like there were like a bunch of libertarian women who did like this like ad like celebrating Hillary's win, and they're saying like for the first time the person who will order drone strikes on Afghan people will be a woman. The first the first person who will order cops to brutalize black people will have a vagina, basically.
Yeah, and inadvertently, this was back, I would say, right before the 2016 election when I considered myself a libertarian.
So did
Um,
I mean,
yeah,
here's the thing about us, like I'm 26 and I grew up in a very religious conservative community. So in 2015, 2016, I had been interested in libertarianism because like I was like thinking about like, oh, government is bad and stuff. Oh, what if we cut down the government? And I was legitimately and like considering like anarcho capitalism of all things. Like David Kokesh and stuff, you know?
and the thing we didn't realize back then is not that government is bad; it's that we have a bad government.
And
There's a
it's not just that.
difference.
We also didn't realize that corporations wield like worldly power. Like the corporations are the ones truly in control. Now, when we were libertarians, we thought, oh, but like the only reason the corporations are control is because the government like, is because we have a government. If we didn't have a government, they wouldn't be in control. But that didn't.
Absolutely not. If there
No,
was no government, we would have Wally. If you know the intro to that, that's what anarcho capitalism would look like.
it'd be
Have you
basically.
seen Have you seen the movie Wally?
I've seen Wally, but it would
Ah,
be more
okay.
like feudalism, basically.
Yeah, and if you want like a futuristic uh twist on that, you got Wally. We don't want
Pretty much.
Wally. So as I was going to say, what you were saying about, oh, we just want a woman in charge or a black man in charge, that mindset inadvertently pushed me further to the right because I got the concept of, oh, whatever traits that leader has doesn't matter. As MLK would say in the famous and very misquoted speech, it would be the content of their character. And that inadvertently pushed me more to the right.
See, today is Martin Luther King Day, and a lot of
Yes.
people have this thing about Martin Luther King, like especially Republicans. By the way, Republicans tend to think that all racism ended in 1965. And so they think, oh, we do live in a society in which we judge people by their character. Though, like these, like people, like I grew up with them, like they were my parents, they were my siblings. You know, they said like, oh, I don't hate someone because they're black. I hate them because they're wearing a hoodie and they're ganged out. And I was like, excuse me.
Yeah. I actually remember not a speech, it was an interview that MLK did 4 years after the I Have a Dream speech, and he was talking about that speech. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, uh the dream that I had turned into a nightmare.
Yeah,
And my optimism about what we were facing, it was he didn't say misplaced. He said it is now hardened with a sense of realism. And
Well,
the
here's the thing. Here's the thing about that. Because in 1968, not a lot of people realize this, but historically, in 1968, Martin Luther King's popularity was actually decreasing. The
Mhm.
Black Panther Party was ascending. Stokely Carmichael had 4 years prior had disavowed nonviolent protest. By the way, like when I learned about like the truth about civil rights movement, when I actually looked past like the establishment narrative of like, oh, Martin Luther King is like made non-peaceful protest like work, basically, because they whitewashed Martin Luther King.
oh my god. The whitewashing that I had to unlearn
Exactly.
about MLK, it it completely changed my worldview.
Yeah. Like last year, I was relearning what I learned about the civil rights movement. And I had to learn about Malcolm X. I had to learn about the Black Panther Party. I had to
Huey
learn about
Newton.
Huey Newton, uh, Bobby Seale, Freddie Hampton, and
Mhm.
in particular, the one figure that actually did the most to inform me about civil rights in that aspect was Stokely Carmichael, who eventually changed his name to Kwame Ture.
Mhm.
And I always have a hard time whether to call him Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture, even though he passed away in like the 90s.
Hey, I have a sense of ignorance with around 40% of the names you just said. I'm going to admit that. I'm going to own up to that, and
All
I
right,
do need to
listen, you
learn
know
more.
Malcolm X?
Yes.
You know Huey Newton?
Yes.
You know Bobby Seale?
It does ring a bell, but
Bobby Seale started the Black Panther Party with Huey Newton.
okay. So he's a
Freddie
co-founder of
Hampton?
Black Panther.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know Freddie Hampton, right?
Yes.
All right, so Stokely Carmichael, you know him?
No.
Okay, I'm going to quickly explain for those who don't know who Stokely Carmichael is. Stokely Carmichael was a member of the Student National Coordinating Committee in the early 60s.
Okay.
And in 1964, he disavowed nonviolent protest.
Okay.
And there is a video clip of him on YouTube explaining why. He said that like Martin Luther King's philosophy, he said, is that nonviolence is like basically it's a marketing thing. Basically, if you suffer, he said, your opponent will see your suffering and he will be moved to change his ways.
I think I'm remembering that speech, and the next part is
And then he
he
said,
was
that's very good.
assuming he was assuming that your enemy has a conscience.
That's what he said. He said the only problem with nonviolent protest in that aspect is in order for it to work, your opponent must have a conscience. And the United States government, he says, does not have a conscience.
Right, right, right.
Now, this is not to say that like Stokely Carmichael came out against Martin Luther King. No, like Martin Luther King was brilliant, and Stokely Carmichael knew that. And he even said like in the by like the 90s and like the late 80s, Stokely Carmichael was saying like, oh, everyone loves Martin Luther King, but they don't know what he said. They don't know what he did.
Exactly. And MLK never spoke out against riots explicitly. He
He never
said
did. Here's the problem with this. Martin Luther King in 1968 wanted to stick with nonviolence, but all the other civil rights leaders were realizing, no, we've reached the limit on civil rights because we're dealing with segregation with nonviolence, but we need to deal with economics and empowerment. And
and
we're not
that's
going to
what
do that
MLK
with
started to
nonviolence.
realize. That's what MLK started to realize towards the end of his life. He said in the interview that I mentioned earlier that what we got in terms of civil rights was at like a bargain bin price. It didn't cost a pet.
Not really. Here's the thing
No,
about
no.
civil
This is what he
rights.
said. This is what he said. Integrating lunch counters didn't cost a penny. Integrating
Yeah,
schools didn't cost a penny. Now we're talking about issues that's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars when it comes to economic reform.
But here's the problem. People think the civil rights movement ended in like
No,
65.
it never ended.
They think it ended with Martin Luther, that it died with Martin Luther, or that it died a peaceful death with Martin Luther King. That's not what happened. Martin Luther King, yes, his philosophy of nonviolence was already obsolete by the time of 1968. However, once he was murdered, all the civil rights leaders, Black Panther leaders, Stokely Carmichael, any like Angela Davis, Rap Brown, I think, they all came out and said, like, you killed the one person who was willing to compromise with you.
Mm-hmm.
You killed him. You just closed the door on a peaceful solution to racial inequality in America. You just declared war on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it got like there were people saying, "Oh, Martin Luther King wouldn't want this," and then like the Black Panthers would respond, "Martin Luther King is dead. He was murdered
Mm-hmm.
because of nonviolence. It doesn't help us anymore."
Right.
And for a time, the Black Panther Party basically became like the successor of the civil rights movement, and they were basically on track to actually. There was a documentary where they were called the vanguard of the revolution. They were a massive threat to the
All right.
establishment.
Yeah. Before we get completely off track, we actually do have to talk about um economics mm, for I think the rest of the episode. Um, the theme of the rest of this episode is going to be how we're spending our money in a completely wrong way, and Shane has come up with a
Well,
brilliant breakdown.
one second. Weren't we also going to talk about the ratchet effect?
Oh yes. Just very quickly.
Plus,
The
I do think we should finish on Martin Luther King because there is something that we should bring up from Stokely Carmichael.
Oh, absolutely. Ex-
Basically, I can do this very quickly if you will,
sure,
you know.
sure. Yeah.
So Stokely Carmichael said Martin Luther King's brilliance wasn't nonviolence, because if that was the case, that was just Mahatma Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
What Martin Luther King did, Stokely Carmichael said, was that he went into Southern communities, Black communities that were completely brutalized by white supremacy to the point of being in fear. And he told them, "We are going to empower you." And they said, "No, we got a nice life here. Like leave us alone." And like Martin Luther King said, "No, this is unjust." And basically, what Stokely Carmichael said was that Martin Luther King taught Black people to stand up to white supremacists without fear, to look at their enemy without fear.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, once I could stand and be beaten down and rise back up without fear, like once I could stand in front of a Klansman without a gun and yet without fear, it didn't take anything for me to take a gun and shoot him.
Mm-hmm.
So that was Martin Luther King's real power. His real brilliance was giving power to people who had been for so long oppressed.
Mm-hmm. So, mo- moving on to the ratchet effect. I'm glad you reminded me on that. The ratchet
No problem.
effect is something that is said in terms of the two political parties. Think of the Republicans, and if you're listening to this in a safe place without driving, close your eyes.
Oh
Uh,
no.
um, imagine the Republicans as like a ratchet wheel turning forward, and the
No,
Democrat
not the
Party.
Republicans. Uh the Republicans are like a cogwheel,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So it's a cogwheel. And
The Democrats serve as, I don't know what's called, the actual ratchet itself, I think.
basically there is a mechanical contraption of a cog that forces it to go only one way.
Yes.
And that if it goes the other way, it gets blocked.
Yeah.
And that is a ratchet.
So
So
so when Republicans are in power, the wheel is turning in
to the
one
right.
direction. You see all of these repressive laws go into effect, oppressive laws that go into effect, stuff when it comes to birth control and lax taxes for the rich. But when Democrats are in power, the wheel can't turn the other way. Like you see it in today's Congress. You see it in today's Congress that Democrats have the House, they have the Senate, they have the presidency, and nothing is getting done. And that's not the system being broken. It is the system working exactly as intended.
And that right there is the issue with politics. Because there's only so much that you can do with working in the system, but if the system doesn't let you go in the direction you want to go, then what's the point? But at the same time, I kind of feel reluctant to go into like full on revolutionary
Hmm.
because revolutions need to have everything go right.
Yeah.
Like when you look at successful revolutions historically, successful revolutions have always had factors in their favor. Like the American Revolution was like a bourgeois kind of, or like it was a landowner's revolution.
Hmm. Like all the
And
founding fathers, save for a some, were slave owners.
yeah, but here's the thing though. Once the revolution was over, George Washington could have easily taken control like the way Napoleon did. But because George Washington was like, I didn't just fight a revolution against one king to become one myself.
And you know how the French Revolution went.
Yeah, Napoleon ended up taking power. Now there is no historically. Once you like understand Napoleon, you understand that like he was a true believer of the revolution, but he felt that like it needed a strong leader.
Yeah, that's when you get into the modern ideas of communism in government, and we get into the Cold War and yada yada
But
yada.
Here's the thing, though. Once Marxism was developed in the 18th in the 1800s, like there was this like the push came for revolutions, and when and here's the thing about the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was based like there were two revolutions. There was the takedown of the Romanov Empire and the Bolshevik Revolution. Now the Romanovs were basically like complete tyrants in a way, like they were monarchs in a way that was outdated by like 400 years or so. They believed that they were godly, like divinely given the right to rule.
Yeah, it was absolute monarchy.
Yeah, and like King Tsar Nicholas, like he allowed the establishment of a parliament, but he didn't like give enough. He didn't like give enough, basically. And by World War I, like once like World War I had gone into like 1917, like it had gotten to the point where the peasants, the workers, the farmers, and the soldiers
They had
were
enough.
all were all revolting against the system. Like Tsar Nicholas had let the situation deteriorate to the point where he had no support and he had no choice but to step down.
And that's when you get into the Bolshevik Revolution. All right.
Well, no. What ends up happening is that the moderate socialists, I think, Kerensky took power, and Kerensky was a socialist, but he was establishment, and he wanted to continue Russian involvement in the Great War, but basically he didn't have like he wasn't able to like retain power. Like the army quickly quickly wanted to get rid of Kerensky, and Kerensky basically had to turn to the Bolsheviks for protection. But it had gotten to the point, like basically the power structures in Russia had devolved from the abdication of Tsar Nicholas to the ending of the Kerensky government, to the point that the Bolsheviks were able to just walk in with a bunch of guns and say, we own this now. Like people think, oh, the Russian Revolution was this big thing where they fought and they took it by force. No, there wasn't. It was a peaceful revolution, actually. Like they just walked in, took control of the telegraph office, took control of the government office, took control, and just literally just walked in and took control. That's literally what they did.
All right, before this goes completely off the rails, we did have an outline for this, but we do tend to ramble.
Yeah.
Shane, you did write down this going back to modern economics and politics. You've written
Well, let's
down,
finish off on the ratchet effect. Basically, the way the system is working, it prevents us from actually getting shit done.
yeah, it's actually built to stagnate when when liberals are in power. So when the conservatives take power, the system can just keep on moving again in the same direction as it was before.
What we really, really need, like desperately, is just a completely new system. We need to like those who want to retain the system don't realize that the system is broken.
Like, and that's the thing, it's not broken. It's working as intended.
Well, I mean, it's a system built on inequality and minority rule. But the problem is that doesn't last long with the people who think that they need to be free. So in that context, it's like an old jalopy, like just breaking down, bolts flying. Like when you have this much wrong with the system, like when you have all these problems, electoral college, Senate minority rule, the ratchet effect, all these different things keep stacking up.
You get this stagnating government that leads to these these social problems.
If you have a government that doesn't work that systemically, then like there's only so much reform is like a band-aid at that point.
Yes.
Like, and theoretically, you can redesign the system with reform.
Like, but you gotta have everybody on board.
Pretty much.
And the people who want real change, I'm not going to say, oh, they're in the minority, like, oh, everybody else around us is bad. No. We don't have any handles on the machine of power. We don't. We really don't. So moving on, finally, hopefully, to the more economic
like we're going to talk about, we're now going to talk about how this is, like if we wanted to reform the system, here's how we could do it. Yeah. Because right now, the way the system is built, it's built in a way that just leaves regular people out to die. Mm-hmm. Like we are a world empire. A lot of people don't like realize this. I think, James, you said that we have what? Like how many bases?
Over 800 bases around the world. Military bases around
the world. We have military bases literally all around the world, yet no other country has a military base on American soil.
And like hell, the U.S. government is ever going to allow a single base on American soil.
It's not going to happen.
It will basically be a news story in and of itself. It'll be a news story in and of itself. It would be an international catastrophe if anybody suggested it.
America is the world empire, basically.
Yeah.
So one of the things that fueled this empire was the military industrial complex. Now, in the late 50s, Eisenhower, a fucking Republican, saw the writing on the wall.
One of the last good Republicans.
depending on your definition. Um, because I would argue, probably make the argument that he was like the last or only, but he wasn't that very good. But when he left in 1960, he warned like it's a like we do need like a constant military, but we can't let that military take control of the government. Like the military industrial complex, he said, if left by itself, it will take control of the government in a very bad way.
And this is actually kind of misinterpreted when it comes to a normal sense of politics. Like, oh, we're going to have a military government. No, no, no. We're talking about the military being kind of like the first priority when it comes to uh the way of thinking of politicians.
Like, here's the thing. My dad is like, he can be conservative in many ways. But one thing he always says is that, like, why is it that we always have money for the military, for war, but we never have money for healthcare or education?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's one thing that we all know. We like the military has a massive budget.
More than 50%, which is, I would say, I would say 25% more than we need, in my personal opinion.
And here's the thing: Republicans are like they think that Democrats are going to take control and just like that it's going to be like prison or something like that. But that's the thing: like every other country, Europe, uh, Canada, Japan, Australia, like they have governments that like they use their taxes to actually make people's lives better.
It's not
So when
perfect.
it's not perfect, but it's better than what we have. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like Republicans have this fear of taxation, like, oh, if you tax us, it'll be horrible. But that's only because over here we don't get anything for it. Like the only reason we hate taxes is because we get jack shit for what
Yeah,
we
we're
pay
the
for.
ones, the middle class are the ones that get taxed the most. When the people with money, they're getting tax breaks. What's with
And it's
that?
not just tax breaks. Like we have a national here, we're gonna get into the numbers now.
Yeah.
Like we have a national budget for 2022. The national budget is $6 trillion. That's how much we're going to spend this year. $6 trillion with a T. Now, one can easily say that when the numbers are this big, it's just pretend because money doesn't really exist.
Shit, money's not real.
Yeah. So like a lot of people when it comes to like these progressive agendas and like the social spending, they are afraid of like how are we going to pay for it? Where are we going to get the money? Like they'll say, "Oh, it's a good idea in theory, but how do we pay for it?" Like the military budget for 2022 for this year, the military budget, how much we're spending on the military? $768 billion.
And what may you ask? Can we spend with $768 billion?
Well, before we talk about that, because we're going to talk about that in a minute, but like 768 billion, like that is like one of the, like it is the biggest thing. Like you have to understand, it's not just that that we're going to spend $768 billion, is that we already have literally the most massive military in the world in history.
Yep.
Like we have so many airplanes and aviation craft that like not only is the Air Force the largest air force in the world, but the Navy and the Marines, even hell, even the Army could all constitute the second largest air force in the world.
And they
We have
are.
so many airplanes that we literally take the top two spots.
Like, we have too many airplanes for the Air Force. We got to distribute it among the other armed forces, and they take up the top 10.
Well, I mean, it's not that we have to distribute. It's just like they use it for operations. But here's the
Yes.
thing: we've already spent so fucking much on the military. We've already like right now we don't have like a very active war. Like we left Afghanistan, we left Iraq.
And we know what that was like.
Yeah, but here's the thing though: the day, like in 2001, the danger was clear. We had terrorists from another country.
Yep.
And we didn't know how to fight them. We knew we were going to have to go to another country. So we entered a 20-year war, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not 2001 anymore. It's not the same world. Like we were, like James and I were both babies when 9/11 happened.
I was. Oh my god.
I
I
was
was.
almost 6 years old.
I was almost 4. I don't
Yeah,
remember that day. I was so
I
young.
do. I
Oh,
do
you
remember it.
do.
I didn't understand it, but like I remember coming home, like my dad opening the door for me to get off the bus. He said, "Hey, Chaim, the Twin Towers came down." I'm like, "What are the Twin Towers?" Like coming into the living room with seeing on the TV, seeing a reporter say 4 planes crashed into these, like, and like not knowing what it was until many years later.
Ah.
Like for a time, I thought that this electric generator factory, basically like a Con Ed station in my neighborhood. Like I heard someone say, "Oh, the Twin Towers are smoked out," and I thought I saw them pointing at the Con Ed building, and I thought, "Oh, like the Con Ed is the Twin Towers." Like I was like 6 or 7 at that time. But basically, the war on terror, like we spent so much on this military, on a world military, basically.
Yeah.
And what happened on January 6th? Who were we under threat by?
Other Americans.
Yeah, it was regular guys from fucking Alabama, of all
And
places.
our military was not prepared for that.
Not
It
only were they
wasn't
not
it wasn't
prepared,
built for that.
not only were they not prepared, even now, the biggest fear for national security is not from international waters. It's not from other countries. The biggest fear is the fact that there are extremist elements in the armed forces.
And the biggest national security threat, according to the Department of Homeland Security, the department formed after 9/11, has said in 2020 that the biggest threat to national security,
2020?
yeah, the biggest threat to national security is domestic right-wing extremists in our own country.
Not to mention 2016, we were hacked by the Republican. Excuse me, for Freudian slip there. In 2016, we were hacked by the Russians.
Right.
And hacking is like that's cyber warfare. That's not something the military does.
I think we
And you
can
don't
wrap
need,
it up with this.
yeah. Basically, we don't need like airplanes to fight cyber warfare. It doesn't work. So think about this. We already have like so many. We have nuclear weapons that we haven't, like, we're never going to use. Basically, hopefully,
We're never going to use it. Hopefully. Yeah.
hopefully. But like we already have the largest military in the world. Why do we need to keep funding it?
Right.
We don't. We don't need to. $768 billion for a military that we honestly don't need and we're not going to use, basically.
In a defensive, what do you call it? In a defensive mindset.
Even in a defensive mindset, we're not going to use like that much of the military. We don't need it.
Yep.
But here's what we do need. We need healthcare. We need infrastructure. We need homes. We need like paid leave. We need free education. We need utilities. Those are things we need.
Mm-hmm.
So $768 billion for a military. Like, people wonder, how are we going to pay for single payer healthcare? It's going to cost like $3 trillion over 1 decade. First of all, that's like a misleading number right there, because like $3 trillion over 10 years. So
It's
per
like
year,
what, 300 billion?
Yeah, per year, that's going to be $300 billion.
That's less than what we spend on our military.
Yeah, we can literally cut the military like in half and have money for a single payer per year. with some left over. Like 700 is like 768. That's
168. No,
no.
Jesus.
That's 350, 350 plus 30, I
That's
think. So
380.
so 388. No, 384. Half of the military
384
budget.
billion.
Yeah, 384 billion is half the military budget.
So I think with that uh set of numbers in your mind, I think that's where we can wrap up.
No. We can wrap up on the military
Okay.
because like we can cut the military budget basically completely at this point.
Yeah.
And we can spend 300 billion a year on single payer healthcare. Healthcare budget in 2020 was 4 trillion in total. We could save money with single payer.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing about healthcare. Healthcare doesn't usually include dental, hearing, and vision. Medicare doesn't have that currently. Do you want to know how much it would be to add dental, hearing, and vision to single payer?
Go ahead.
Single payer costs $300 billion a year. Vision, dental, and hearing is only an additional 36 billion.
That's a little over 10% of what we
Yeah.
already spend.
So single payer would basically cost us $350 billion a year.
Yeah.
And not only that, those of us who are leftists, who are social democrats, those of us who say like housing is a human right, we should guarantee housing for all. Every person should get a house, basically. How much would that cost? That would cost only $150 billion a year. Many of the things that like we want to pay for, like they're like compared to the military budget, they are dead cheap.
Pocket change.
Like universal pre-K is $100 billion, $150 billion per year. A free house for everyone, housing for all guarantee, $150 billion a year. Universal pre-K, $150 billion a year. 3 months national paid leave, which every other country in Europe has, Canada has, I think, Japan has it, Australia has it. How much would it cost for us? $55 billion a year. We can have 3 months paid leave for a paltry $55 billion a year.
And what do we have? 12 weeks unpaid leave. The only other country that doesn't have the only I would say the only other country that we've seen doesn't have national paid leave is New Guinea.
Jesus Christ.
New Guinea. We are one of the most advanced countries in the world, and we have something in common with a with a partly island nation. That's something we have in common with New Guinea.
And not only that, we're talking about like we want like college to be free.
Yep.
Now we're not talking about Harvard and Yale. We're not talking about Ivy League and private colleges, but we have
College.
public colleges. We have government-owned colleges, government-operated colleges, public college, and we still pay for that. We could make public college tuition free. Get this? You ready for this?
I'm ready.
$80 billion a year.
Mm.
$80 billion a year for free public college. Like we can have the things that we want on our list to help people.
Yeah.
And there is like one other thing that like Bernie Sanders has like been talking about. Like we spend so much basically for Wi-Fi, you know, for like Spectrum, you know, Verizon, T-Mobile. Like we spend on Wi-Fi. If we had publicly owned broadband, publicly owned Wi-Fi, you know how much it would cost? This is like the most insulting of all. You ready for this?
I'm ready.
$15 billion.
15.
And just for the record, Elon Musk is the richest man, I think, in the world with 200 billion. 200 billion is his net worth.
Yeah.
Like
He
Elon
could pay
Musk.
for that.
Elon Musk with like less than 10%, I think, of his net worth. He could pay for national broadband.
He could pay for free public college. He could he could pick from this list that we put in, and he could pay for it single-handedly.
Except for single payer.
Except for single payer, but like most of the list, he can pick one and just do it.
Yeah,
he can do it.
That's one of the things. That's one of the things I wonder about billionaires. You know, like how many of us who want to become a billionaire, we say, oh, if I could be a billionaire, I would pay for this. I would do that. Like there are a lot of people say like, oh, if I were a billionaire, I would pay for the stuff that like everyone else struggles for. I would pay for college. I'd pay for this. I'd pay for food. Give everyone free food. Give everyone money and stuff. You know?
Yeah, and the thing I want to say before we end part 1 of this episode is you gotta remember this.
But we still have one more part of part 1.
No, I think we can wrap it up. Probably put in part 2. So
no, we got the IMF. Remember?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. See, we spent like an hour like planning this out.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about that. So yeah, getting onto something of the same vein. Shane wanted to talk about the how did you exactly put it?
Basically, we don't just spend money on the military.
Right.
We also spend money on a lot of things. And one of the most important things that we spend money on are industry subsidies.
Mm-hmm.
We pay to support industry. And when we're dealing with global warming, the way like we need to address global warming.
Yes.
And there are many people who say like, oh, we can't have a Green New Deal because that'll cost way too much. It'll be a boondoggle. But here's the thing.
Who the hell says boondoggle?
I don't know. I say it.
Okay.
Anyway, so
I won't judge.
Not a lot of people realize that we actually fund the fossil fuel industry.
Yes.
We actually pay like ExxonMobil. We pay like there was a dog in the background.
Yep, I have 2 dogs.
So we pay ExxonMobil. We pay the oil companies basically to destroy our environment. That's what like people should be pissed off at that. And you know what? How much we spent on fossil fuel subsidies?
How much?
In 2020, we spent on fossil fuel subsidies $662 billion.
Actually, isn't that more than our current military budget?
No, it's like $100 billion less than the military budget.
And not by much.
We are literally paying to destroy our environment. This should piss everybody off.
Yeah.
And like we know that global warming is going to affect us.
It's already affecting us.
Yeah. Like the past 3 years, I think were like the hottest years on record.
That's how it's been for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Every year it's been the hottest on record.
And not only this, in 2017, the GAO released a report that found that global warming was already costing us over a 10-year period in 2017, that was from 2007 to 2017, $350 billion in global warming costs. And that includes like funding for disasters like Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy. You know?
Yeah.
So we are not only funding our own destruction,
And
But we
we're
also have to
also,
pay for when it fucks us up.
yeah, we fund the problem and we fund the cleanup for the problem that we fund. It's crazy.
But here's the
So,
thing, though. For us to
okay.
get 100% renewable energy by 2050, it'll only be about like $270 billion a year.
And when we're talking the form of governments and what they already spend, this is nothing.
Like, that's the thing, though. Like, all the conservative minded people say, oh, how are we going to pay for all this shit? They don't realize that we're already paying so much on opposites. Like we can, like, what we should already be doing is divesting from fossil fuel industries, from fossil fuel like subsidies. We should divest those subsidies. We should not be paying for companies that literally destroy the environment.
Mm-hmm.
That $662 billion, we can use that
Yep.
to fund a Green New Deal. We can fund renewable energy.
Like, we have the money. We just don't have the will. That's
It's
the
not
big
will, it's
thing.
political will.
Yeah,
Because
that's what I
here's,
mean. Political will.
but we can do it if we have enough like willpower for it.
Yes,
But like,
absolutely.
if anyone tells you that we can't afford them, just tell them to shut up. Because like,
Point at the IMF estimates for oil subsidies and point at our current military budget and say, we have the fucking money.
we
We
have the money.
absolutely have the money.
We have a yearly budget right now of $6 trillion. And almost a trillion, like just under a trillion of that. Like seven, like actually 1.4 trillion, I think, is being spent on the military and fossil fuel subsidies.
Right. And now that we've covered all this with the military and oil, I want to wrap up with this. All of these things, every single item that we wanted in this little wish list that we made, each one is less than what we spend on the military and on oil subsidies. Every single one is cheaper. Everything we want is cheaper than what we're already doing.
And get
So
this, like all these conservatives, they talk about being fiscally responsible.
we're not
They
being
talk about
responsible.
they talk about like, oh, we want to be fiscally responsible. We want to cut the military budget. We like, well, I mean, they want to keep the military budget, but they say, oh, we want to cut government spending,
Right.
and they point to things like social spending. They want to end social spending and fund the military. They think we need the military. We don't need the military. We already have the largest military.
Right. Before I let you off the leash again, I think this is where we can wrap up part 1
Yeah,
of
basically to close out on this, like the fiscally responsible thing to do is to cut the military budget, cut fossil fuel subsidies, and just pay for the shit that we need.
yeah, with that, we are going to wrap up part 1 of episode 2 of the Rejects of Capitalism podcast. I am James Rooney,
And I am Shane Turner.
and we will see you in part 2, which is going to be up shortly. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everybody.